Hello and welcome back. Thank you for that. This is the recording for 3 approaches to giving feedback. So thank you. Everyone has just been off in their breakaway rooms. Christo, it's not that funny. Oh, it wasn't me. So what did you what did you chat about? What is the big value you give in feedback sessions? Yeah, Miriam. Hello.
Hi. For the client to be recognized and heard, to feel that they're really being heard and appreciated for who they are.
Cool, thank you. So it's a listening, it's like a listening role.
Yeah.
And inviting. Great, thank you. Anyone else want to add in here?
Yeah, actually, we spoke quite a bit about focusing on the positive, around what is, so that the more negative side can land well. So it's really about saying, what is it that the person can hear that's good about them, the positive feedback. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, encourage them as humans. It's really hard to be human. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Nazima. Anyone else? Yeah, Helena.
So this was an afterthought. We ran out of time. It was around thinking about the Enneagram style of the person. And that the way one would give feedback to an 8 is quite different to how to give feedback to a 2.
Yeah.
And so that this, for me, there's some overarching things around do no harm, be careful not to hurt. But then in giving the feedback, that feedback to an 8 would be more bigger picture, more condensed and compressed. And if I was giving feedback to a 2, I would be gentler and fluffier. Anyway.
No, that's good. That's very important, and something I want to chat through quite a lot today, because it not just Enneagram, but also Trifix, instinctual subtype, because, the intensity lovers like a different kind of chat to the sort of more self-preservation people. And then also maturity levels, what maturity level, what kind of language would work. Yeah, very important. Did anyone try to change the client? Is that the impact you might have wanted? Or bring some insights? Yeah.
So we didn't discuss this particularly, because I also kind of feel it's kind of holding a space is one of the primary values, but sometimes there's just an understanding of the report that's required. I've had a feedback session where it was literally a sort of a technical understanding.
Yeah.
Was required and provided. I mean, and it happened to be that I wasn't able to provide the technical understanding, but could go back and find out about it. But I think there's an element of that. I also was saying to Alistair that I've had a couple of sessions where the person has come in not having read the report, not having actually made the time, taken the time, and that throws one a little bit, because that's a different feedback session.
Yeah.
That one just needs to be prepared for.
Yeah.
But I've got more comfortable with, where previously I needed to be prepared and structured and ready, and I kind of fortunately am able to hold a looser session now, where it's more space and less structure. And I suppose, I haven't yet got very good at doing it as per Enneagram type or maturity level. That's a missing thing for me still.
It all takes a long time. And how do you deal with it when people haven't read the report? And who do you suspect is typical of a not report reading person? Where would you find that, do you think?
This particular person I'm thinking of is an Enneagram 9. I'm not sure specifically what would be typical.
Yeah, I don't know what is typical, but I know that often the 7s get bored halfway through and don't finish the report, and or haven't got there, or maybe they're like very sort of specializing Enneagram 3 and too busy to read the report. All of this is very useful stuff, but it means that you can't work with the report in the feedback session. You have to play other games to try and get them, and without shaming them. Yeah, and you never know that if the 7s, some might read it intensely and come with lots of questions, and some might not. But I think a useful tip is like the thinking about the person and wondering if they're going to have read the report. So like often sort of conventional ones will have read the report and written comments. Yeah, and then just sort of work through that and get some thoughts before around what you expect to happen. I'm really interested in your responses as to what the big value you think you deliver in the sessions. Holding, hearing, doing no harm, supporting. Like, I know it's a kind of a tricky language thing, but like, what about bringing insights or landing? I mean, I'm going to language this badly, but I've got a client at the moment that is going through some sort of process where I have to land the complaints his boss has against him. So there might be, things like that as well, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Elaine is laughing because I think she's been there as well. I suppose, other personal stuff like being memorable and useful and valuable for the client in some way. So that's always very interesting. And I look around, I see quite a lot of post-conventional people here. And then I go, okay, so that's like where that answer came from. If you guys were sort of earlier stage, you might have stuff like changing the person's behavior or making them understand that they needed to blah, blah, blah. So that's also just interesting. And how does your mood impact on your ability to give feedback, or how the session unrolls? Did anyone get any answers there? Who wants to go? Anyone? Krista, yeah.
Yes, I'll share. For us in the conversation, everyone agreed that it matters, that it matters hugely. And Lerato spoke from the perspective of being a client, and Miriam from the perspective of going into a coaching session, checking in on your mood and being conscious of your mood. It's an interesting question for me, is what do you do with your mood as you go towards a session? What it is there, and the mood is also encountering another mood. The client also has a mood, and something happens there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really, really interferes hugely. I know that when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I want to coach clients into feeling overwhelmed. I want someone to back my version of the world.
my sin in that space is cynicism. I want to my own cynical perspective on the world.
You see, there we go. So we want clients to back our view often. And what about jealousy and envy? Anybody been envious of clients? I have. Yeah. Yeah. No, like, one of my biggest envy, now I'm earning a more consistent living. It's not such a bother, but in the beginning, going and working in corporates, and my income was so dribby-drabby, and I'd look over and they'd have like a fantastic income and revenue stream and all this confidence around the next paycheck. And there I was on, bones of my ass. And so I used to have envy. A lot of envy, which I think made me sometimes a little bit hard towards my clients. Any other feelings? What about hangovers? What about sexual attraction? Oh.
Yeah, I can't think of a client with the sexual attraction, but I sometimes go into a session with some anxiety.
Yeah,
it's this kind of need to prepare, need to get it right, need to be successful, 3 energy. And I was also just saying to Alistair that once in the session, I then kind of get into the mood and enjoy it and find it rewarding, but the pre-session, that sort of preparatory phase, I don't enjoy it. I almost find it irritating that it makes me anxious. There's an irritation. I've got a session, which is not a nice feeling to bring at all. But I think it's linked to that kind of, I must get it right. The session must be good, which I'm now aware of and trying to sort of shift away from. I think I'm moving away from that, but that's been my experience.
I actually think everyone has a level of that. Everyone often has an idea of how it feels for the session to be successful. And sometimes it's explicit and sometimes implicit. And I think, everyone's got an idea. I mean, like, for example, I'll know it's successful if they affirm my view of them, or if they shift, or if I feel nice after, or if they're nice to me. And then you get an Enneagram 2 that's only nice to you. How do you tell? Miriam, did you want to say something?
Yeah. When I started coaching, I worked a lot with private equity firms. And what I started to believe is that if the client got a lot of value when they said that, then that was a successful session. So I used to try to shove in a lot of value. And I mean, I laugh about it now. But it was like, the guys would say, well, if I lose X dollars per hour, I need to get that value. And it took me a while to disentangle from that. That was the most difficult thing for me, the value. And once in a while, I still struggle with it, but I know that it's my struggle. And so it's still there, but I notice it that I'm doing that. So I become aware of it and pull back.
Yeah, because that anxiety can drive all sorts of less useful behaviors in the session. And then there's that weird thing that you might think the session was not useful and the client might think it was incredible. Like, how confusing is that? Like, who really is the best judge? But yes, just to highlight some of the feelings that we can come in to the session with. I've got a couple of slides. Thought we could just have a chat. Alistair, you want to say something? Hi.
Yeah, I think we need to have a supervision session on this issue of attraction to a client.
Yeah.
It, I mean, it's such a big topic. I mean, it really hit me in real life, you know, just came out of the blue. And things almost got out of control. And that being said, right, so I started looking it up. In psychology, they call it transference. And it's like a big topic in that space. But for me personally, what I learned from that whole experience was, so if you look at that maturity model, apparently you can only start dealing with your shadow at like strategist level.
Earlier,
can you? Okay, that's a topic for another day. So it's to say, if as a leader you have not dealt with those shadow elements, whether you're a coach or a business leader, whatever stage, for me, the way I understand the model is post-con strategist level, you have to see like, you know, why am I a coach or a leader? And, you know, I'm attracted to a client. That's a question you need to ask yourself at whatever stage you're at. And then how will you how's that going to impact you and your client? And the next thing, there's a Me Too movement against you, and it's too late. Yeah.
Let's hope it's not quite as dramatic as that. But you're right. You know, when you're training to be a psychotherapist, you do a whole lot of work on sexual attraction and what to do with it in the session. And so I wrote an article once, I must try and dredge it up, which is like, why do we coaches think we're immune from sexual attraction? I know I'm attracted to many of my clients, many of them, and in different ways. And some I find lovely, and then I find myself flirting with them. And it's just an interesting thing that happens. I don't consider it particularly dangerous as long as I'm seeing it. But I think that it you know, it can be a dangerous thing for the client if they misunderstand the signaling. And that's something else that coaches are particularly bad at, and that is the frame. You know, in therapy, they talk about the frame. You know, you keep the frame, you start at this hour, you end at this hour, you have this kind of context, you have, you know, you dress in a certain way, all of that's frame keeping, which us as coaches, we schmooze all over. And then we have problems around sexual attraction. Yeah, in all my years, I've only seen one very dangerous situation. Yeah, somehow people manage that. But I think it's a very useful thing to explore and understand and figure out what's actually going on in the session. I remember we had a supervision session on this for my psychotherapy training. And the discussion also went into the area of, is it okay to be slightly flirty in a session? And that was an interesting debate. And actually, sometimes I think that's okay. Like, oh, come on, man, why don't you just try it? You know, that sort of a thing. Maybe that's useful. But I think we all need to think about this and work with it. Thank you, Alistair, for bringing it up. I think we should be writing about it and exploring it. Any comments about sexuality and sexual attraction in coaching? No. Cool. Well, we can come back. So I've got a few slides, and they really relate to what's going on. I think we just chat through. Would that work for you guys? We just use the kind of slides as as prompts and work from there. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about prep work. Prepping for sessions. There we go. So all that stuff around how am I today that we spoke about. What's unresolved in me today, waiting to interrupt the session. And I love to have this idea of like, oh, there's something creepy waiting to erupt. And generally in my world, it's often like I'm overwhelmed, or people are not grateful enough, or some old patterning that is desperate to insert itself into the session. And I don't know if everybody can be totally clean, but I just think that awareness is useful. I also love to ask myself, how am I going to irritate the client today? And to acknowledge that actually I will in some way. I'll push here, I'll push there. I won't always be lovely. You know, maybe I'll be sloppy with the technology. Who knows? And I think it's just useful to acknowledge that's possible, and so what, actually. And so when you do irritate the client, to be able to come cleanly into that conversation, because it might lead you somewhere useful. Just that technology thing. And for me, I need a constant reminder, have I brushed my hair today? Because that's my go-to place is not to brush hair. What does my Zoom background look like? Is it appropriate? And I think, last week we looked at trends with coaches, and we saw how coaches are professionalizing. And so how we look is going to become more and more important. So then go and look at the actual report, the context for the session. So how are you going to have it? How are you going to frame it? How are you going to work with time? All of those things are very useful. And I actually think we should have a session on creating a coaching frame. So some sort of tight frame that says, this is how I'm going to work. This is how I bill. This is how I work. And then what E-type? And so was that Helena, you who's saying like, if the 8s maybe go this way, if the 2s go this way, don't be too big with the 9s. That's my work, is to keep my energy low in case I terrify people. So all of those sorts of things. How much agency can you expect in the session? And of course, agency means who takes control, who runs the session. Do you go in and you say, howdy, you take over, or is that going to be disturbing for that person? And then try a fix. Now, for me, my big learning here is 836, 846. Those two particular profiles, try-fixes, are highly reactive. And so, but all the 8s, all the 4s, and the 6s, well, not all the 6s, but a lot of them, and not all the 8s. So what that means is get your language really good and very neutral. Often highly reactive people. Anyone else had that experience? 846, 836. Yeah, you have, Linda. What was your experience?
Well, obviously coming as an 8 myself, I also have to be very careful about how I come in. And I have of late coached quite a few 6s. And yeah, I have to be really careful to be gentle with the level of anxiety and not like try and bully them out of it, because otherwise they do come back with a lot of defense and and excitement. And also, I mean, I have quite a lot of experience with fours as well, strangely. And the fours are very intense and really, yeah, have to let them explain their world, because I'm not going to be able to explain it well enough for them. So
yeah. Excellent. So you're thinking about, like, if I'm in a session with a 4, less talk from me, more from them. And so on and so on. Yeah. But obviously, I mean, these are just wild patterns, and then you go in and you feel your way through. Yeah, cool. Thank you. And then the subtype, you know, self-preservation people, often calmer, they need more distance from the coach, they think stuff through, they might not be as revealing, and they certainly won't be as intense. Social people, maybe more around how am I looking in the session. And the one-on-ones, you know, they're going to want to go and have a huge, big, intense one-on-one discussion with you and meet you and chew over you. So those are also kind of rules on what to expect. Which are always useful. Yeah, and know how you are. If you're SX, or, you know that the SPs are going to find you a bit much. And so on and so on. And then what maturity level? So this is really useful, because at earlier stages, people want you to play more of a telling role, telling you what's going on. They want you to be more of an expert. And certainly at specializing level, people want your expert credentials. They want you to quote people. They want you to be the expert. So you have to sort of wiggle around that. And something I sometimes say is, I'm an expert on the theory, but you're an expert on your life. And then you never say you blah, blah, blah in the session. You say the theory suggests that people with this profile can. So you're always making sure that life is taking priority rather than theory. Any other ideas about things to think about before a session? What is not here is race and gender. And I mean, so that it's a very big subject, but sometimes it's useful to say things like, what is it like for you to be doing a one-on-one session with a Black person or a white person or an Indian person or whatever? Just to be like straightforward, but be careful, because if they're at early stages of maturity, they're going to say, no, it's no problem, we're all the same. It's not going to be useful, it might be threatening. Anybody want to comment on race, cross culture? No, just something to be aware of. Okay, so I've got 3 approaches. Lerato, did you want to comment?
I think, yes. Just from a leadership perspective, having had managed team members and having had grown up in South Africa with all our challenges around the topic, you know, you spot on when you're saying the older, how did you phrase it?
More mature.
More mature people who just don't want to rattle the cage or even go there. So it's, in most of the companies that I've worked for, I just realized that certain races navigate towards their own. So in terms of just comfort levels, whether I'm a Tswana speaking woman and I'd like a personal assistant who speaks Setswana, so that on those tired days or just days where I want to give my English speaking a rest, because it doesn't come naturally, as compared to my own language, So it's very interesting. Just at this stage, I can only speak from a coachee point of view, but I know that when I started my coaching sessions and I had to select a suitable coach. Obviously, you look at credentials and different races and all that. Just instinctively, you lean towards somebody that looks like you, and and then you start looking at everybody's credentials, and at the end of it, you realize that race isn't and shouldn't be a driver in terms of who you're coaching, who's coaching you. But at the same time, by virtue of me just instinctively looking and seeing someone that looks like me, I navigate towards them. So meaning that it cannot be ignored, you see?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something to look at. And I think because South Africa is such a, issue of race is such a hot potato that people are sort of tired of going there. They just want to all get along. But then when the pressure is on, you see these issues surface. Yeah.
Yeah, Loretta, I think that's an excellent description there. This idea that coaching across races, say, is less psychologically safe than being coached by someone your own race. And so that needs to be in some way accommodated in the coaching, or maybe even surfaced and worked with. Yeah. I think that's a really
I have an example, Julia. I coached a man last year, and he had by the second or the third coaching session, what came out very strongly was that he had a very big issue with white men bossing him around. And here I was as a white man in the coaching position. And so at that point we had to come into the conversation and become part of what is unfolding.
Yeah, I think it's useful. I just think that it's a tricky subject. If we could just start having the language, sorting out the language and finding ways to talk about it, it could be really useful. We do in our DEI courses racial hot button interviews, and what they're about is just basically working through someone's life and seeing how homogenous their kind of friends and families were, what they were exposed to, whether they were rich or poor, whether they fitted stereotypes, and trying to look at places where people might be triggered from by interacting with people of other races. So, for example, white people that grow up poor, when they might say, well, Black people are poorer in South Africa than white people, then they might find that triggering. So then you have to work through that hot button and kind of work around it to kind of remove its potency. It's very, very interesting work, I must say. We can chat more about that later, but it's so critical in senior leaders who are still carrying all sorts of hot buttons and shame buttons that get triggered and cause trouble in the workplace. Yeah.
And it's still very much a reality for most people,
Yeah.
even mentally, because, for example, somebody like me with people who were previously oppressed in this country, like when there's no just off the bat seeing, like experiencing or interacting with a white person, there's no way of knowing if they are woke and they are non-racial, and you first have to interact, and there's a way that you speak to a progressive, like to speak to people in general. But if you come at a person, with the history that we have, it triggers people, and it's the whole speaking over and over people. So I can relate to that, and it is triggering. And it's, if when you're coaching, you need to be aware of those dynamics when it comes to people who have been previously disadvantaged or oppressed, or so it's a reality, especially with women, for example, that are still trying to crack the ceiling, and they've got all these challenges that they face, and then coupled with the race issue, it can be a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the other way around. Looking at white men and their lostness, and some of their entitlement, and white women. So everyone has got something that we must feel our way through. And I think I would just love it if coaches could be a little bit more race savvy and race brave, because then we could probably do some work. So thanks, Lorata, for bringing that in. So approach number 1 is basically working through the assessment and the report page by page using theory. And so I use this term, using theory to fish. So you do stuff like, the theory suggests blah, de, blah, de, blah. Does that work for you or not? So you're fishing, you're constantly fishing, and you see what you can catch. And so, like Joe, I think it was you, was talking about people who want theoretical explanations, and more of the kind of, the theory behind it. This might be a way to go. So, going through it laboriously is probably better for people at conventional levels of maturity, people that actually want to do that. So some people do ask from time to time, and they tend to be kind of linear thinkers who want to work through a document, and they often have notes in the margin. Or instances where you're working at specializing level and you need some kind of academic or scientific credibility. That's useful. So like, you're working with Enneagram 5s at specializing. Yes, they love science and they love that sort of angle. So use the report. And also often when people start giving feedback, they use this kind of map approach as they feel their way into their own style. This is more about the coach leading. It's theory telling and fishing. And probably, the interesting thing about the AIM is the 2 assessments. The Enneagram bit works in a way better with people at conventional levels of maturity, and the maturity bit works better with people from performing upwards. And that's something to do with capacity for abstract thinking, capacity for self-reflection, ambition around learning. People that want to learn about this. So if you're going to do like a very linear kind of report thing, I've never done that with the maturity section, I've really only done it with the Enneagram. So like, I think some of the magic that comes from this approach is just really helping people to process the theory, doing the fishing thing, so linking. So it's almost like you're inviting them to like go and look at the smorgasbord and choose a couple of starters and 3 main courses that they're going to take home. But one of the really big things that can happen when you work with reports like this is people realize they're missing information. So like, no ways do I come across as that. No, I'm not helping people to manipulate them. So then there's an information gap. Not always, does that make sense? So what you want there is, the outcome you want is, I'm going to go and find out what people think about me. Not so useful for people who've done a lot of work on themselves because they get bored. They know this stuff. They're bored. And also, you need to be very careful with people that don't see themselves in the report. In our experience, that's very rare. But some people don't. For example, Enneagram 2s can't see a lot of more sort of earlier stages. Enneagram 2s don't always see their manipulation. They don't see the intention. For me, the hardest Enneagram to land is the 2s, for them to see that actually, you know, this is strategic giving, and they're not just completely serving the universe, which is their own version of themselves. So that you have to work very carefully with. But this is a very sort of basic standard way of working with a report. You just go through it, you answer questions, you use theory, you hope they land a couple of ideas, and you hope they go and look for more information. A second approach is kind of more outcome orientated. So I thought, I mean, there's a gazillion approaches. I had like 20, and I've chosen 3. I've chosen this one because I'm actually doing a piece of work at the moment where this very senior leader has HR said he's doing blah, 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 blah. It's not working. He's had very bad culture survey results. So it's a very focused intervention with very specific outcomes that HR have worked, developed with him. So the whole context setting thing is critical. I'm having to fill in forms with outcomes that will be looked at and measured. You know, what I've noticed more and more and more is how much the HR function is actually getting involved in the relationship. I think this is like what one would call a high value leader. This is a high value leader in a high stakes environment. So maybe it's even more pronounced. And then, you know, when you work with, I wouldn't work with the assessment sort of, or the report straight on. I would try and figure out how they're feeling about it, because to jump into a report without having processed the kind of the nature of the session is quite difficult. So how do they feel about being sent off to a coach? I mean, that's much more important. Do they feel betrayed, shamed? What's at stake? Are they going to lose their jobs? How are they feeling about the staff that said mean things in the culture survey? All of those things, in a way, are much more useful to process than the report. And then sort of, what energy do they have to change? What cultural and demographic issues? So this piece of work I'm working with is South African coach, let's say South African coach, Iraqi client, and American HR. let's just say. So what is that particular heady cultural mix going to do? Just useful. And then I would sort of go like, what do you think your impact is? And only then, hey, there's Vicky, she's awake. Only once you've worked through all of this other stuff, get to the AIM report. And then you can be much more specific about parts of the report. Hi, Vicky, you've done your school run.
I have. I hope it's not too disruptive to come in at this late hour.
Lovely to see you. Lovely. We're just looking at a second approach, which is sort of more with somebody with prescribed outcomes from HR, say. So then the idea of the report is to try and see if they match the problematic behaviors and looking specifically at that. So if they're Enneagram 8 and they want, the HR said, we want this person to be gentler and softer, then we looked in the Enneagram 8 part of the report, see if that matches that, see if it matches that person's experience of themselves. And also ask them, how do they know how they impact on other people? Which is like a mad question because, and often people don't know how to answer that. How do they know? I mean, the case of this client, he said, I know they love me because they said such nice things at a public forum. And that's not knowing. It's just interesting. Please feel free to interrupt me as I kind of roll through these. How are you doing? Yeah, Joe.
Yeah. The comment you made about where HR or a manager in the organization is heavily invested in the coaching relationship, I find very tricky. You know, this whole thing around report on the goals that have been set or the outcomes that have been set, and then report on each session, which obviously there's this confidentiality boundary, so one just fluffs around, you know, the superficial, or not superficial, but limited amount of information one can provide. But I find that the person you're coaching has struggles with that trust around the confidentiality from their HR team. You know, it's broken so often in corporates, is my experience, my hard experience.
Yeah.
And it's a real struggle to manage that and to say to the HR person, you know, I don't trust you and they shouldn't trust you and nobody should trust you, because most stuff in corporates does not really stay confidential. You know, obviously as coaches, it's a very strict thing that we manage. And I think most coaches probably do really well. But there's not the same standard of confidentiality in a corporate environment because there are other things that are important.
Yeah, it's a very interesting case, this case. HR is incredibly powerful in the business, which is unusual for a start. And the CEO is very coaching orientated. And I don't have to report back after each session. And his performance will be measured maybe tiny bit by me, but mainly from people in the organization. And the objectives are things like delegate more or be more culturally appropriate. Or, yeah, but it's hell of a tricky. And this is an HR function where everyone is trained as a coach and everyone knows. And actually their intention is good and they are actually quite enlightened and they know what they're doing, but it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the ways that I've started to work with these guys is very much from an object relations perspective. And I find that works really well. And different people have different sensitivities around terminology. So like, I might not say something like childhood patterns, because some people might find that offensive. Or it's too kind of psychological. I might use something like habits that you use to get what you wanted in your family, or something a little bit more neutral, and say like, what are the habits in your family that you're still doing now? And are they useful or not? Like, is it still useful, you know, to argue rudely in order to get your own way? And then go back to where arguing rudely was incredibly useful, and validate it. You know, it's this behavior supported that person. So you can't like throw it away, validate it, and just invite people to be more flexible rather than say you can never argue radically. That's my strategy. People have different approaches. Yeah, anybody want to comment on that object relations kind of approach? Do other people use that? Like, where did you learn this behavior sort of approach? Yeah. Cool. And no one want to comment? Okay. Cool. It's just a little bit more here. Actually, on this is more the coach. The coach is still leading in many ways, because you've got these outcomes. Yeah. Style is once again theory telling and fishing and cross-referencing sectors. So like like how I do that is I would say like, okay, so when you go home, are you like grumpy and rude to your children too? For example. So you're trying to make the learning from one sector now live in another or not. And if it doesn't live in another sector, then you can go, wow, what's different? How can you do that in the other sector? That's sort of a movement across contexts. And that's very useful. Not useful for people that have done more work on themselves, because they tend to want to go deeper and less short term, but not always true. And the problems are really making sure that you're pulling the learning through right from when the behaviors were learned right through to how they're manifesting now, and to build some flexibility in them. This is Laurent, I have to go, yeah. Cool. Okay, so how are you all doing? Do you want to say anything? You all with me? Am I going on too long? You're right.
I'm enjoying this so far. I've already learned 3 new things that I was unaware of that I learned. So thank you. I may be silent, but I'm really enjoying it.
Great. Cool. Thank you. So this is like, you know, I have more of a psychotherapy background. So often this is kind of how I like to roll. And that's like flow and pattern recognition. So I don't go through the whole report. I might say to them, did you like it? Did it feel right in general? Or were there specific things you wanted to talk about? And then I say something like, do you want to run this session? Do you want me to? How do you want to roll with this? And then see how it goes. And sort of typically people at later stages of maturity are more likely to want to run with the session, except for late stage people who often really can roll anyway. And then I often say, well, I love coming in through childhood patterns and looking at how those manifest, and then coming in through like behavioral patterns, and then hopping about in history. Do you do that at work? Do you do that at home? How are you with your friends? Are you also grumpy there? You know, using that one, making that learning get consolidated by moving it in sectors, and looking for patterns. I like just flowing, and I think flowing is very affirming for clients. So it's just like building on what they said continually. This idea of abstract thinking, you know, some of my favorite clients are very ADHD, and they are so good for training your mind, because coaches get caught in details, and then they decide they need to understand the details of a story, and then they interrupt the client and they ask them details. But actually, the coaches don't need to understand the details. The coaches need to understand the narrative, the big story that's being told. And so, like, if you want to train your mind, go and get yourself some great ADHD clients like me that just ramble endlessly over a million stories, and find the integrating narrative, because that's the beauty and the gem. It's such a joy when you can start seeing that come through, and you realize the client has told you 20 stories and it's all about the same thing. And what a beautiful gift to your client. So that's, you know, working with abstract thinking, yours, but also the client. Building their capacity to start seeing all their meta narratives, and to think about what it looks like from another perspective. You know, like, oh, I wonder what that person thinks of you. Do they think you're grumpy? Do they think you've got a part of you that's not grumpy, that they're not seeing? You know, those sort of multiple perspectives. The other thing I like to do, but it's a very dangerous strategy, is this relating thing, and saying stuff like, oh, you should see me when I take criticism, I'm really bad. So you're kind of using yourself to normalize something and validate how that person might feel. But it's unbelievably dangerous, because I know that I love to insert myself in the coach's narrative, the client's narrative in life. And my ego just like lures me in there every time, as if, you know, I've got so much value to add by showing them my life. And it's incredibly dangerous, because it can be incredibly offensive. The client can go like, no, this is about me. I don't want to hear about you. But it can also be used quite powerfully. So this last, just stop me. You know, I'm ADHD, I just talk. So stop me if you want to like add in anything.
I love this, Julia. It's so valuable what you are sharing in all three approaches. What I'm interested in is the childhood and how early you bring it into the narrative, or into the for me, because sometimes I feel almost I don't want to jump their childhood on them, but there is ways to almost work it back from the present into the childhood.
I don't have any rule there. I think feel your way backwards or forwards. But what I also see sometimes is even if you jump in straight in there, sometimes you offer a lot of relief by languaging their childhood in a neutral way. And validating their experience, if you know what I mean, like saying, oh, when you say something like, okay, let's work with Enneagram 9. So you say something like Enneagram 9 personality forms when there's too much conflict or too little. And in a way that kind of, they can go in and tell you how their brothers and fathers beat them up, or how the family just sat quiet in front of the television for years while everyone was doing dodgy shit and no one faced up, they can go as deep as they want to, but that little particular equation of hypervigilance around peacefulness comes from too much or too little. So then it also gets around some of the cultural and racial issues as well. So, like, for example, growing up in poverty can lean you into being an Enneagram 1, because you've got to manage stuff at the micro level. But it's not, there are other causal factors as well. Where am I going to with this? But, criticism, managing the micro detail. I don't know where I was going. Maybe it'll come back. But I think it's useful in terms of like cultural stuff, to say like, okay, let me come back to that when I have that brain cell in action, because that brain cell is not in action.
There's something in there as well, is the present, in terms of their present experience and engagement with things like race and so on, that is rooted in that child. And that it makes it understandable, or at least recognizable in some way.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think, like, I think Black people, so certainly in this country, will grow up more sensitive around race than white people. And so the impact on childhood might be bigger in a more noticeable way. And that's useful because, so I've come across sort of numerous Enneagram 8s, for example, who have had racial difficulties in their childhood. And it's that kind of swung the personality into a more aggressive person. So, yeah, thank you. So, yeah, that too much, too little idea is useful there. Thanks, Krista. Linda, where were you?
I was just going to relate to your relating and say I notice that I also love to do that. I love to explain by explaining what I do and how I do it. And it's a great reminder to be careful not to make it all about me. And at the same time, I do know, because I often work with people who don't have a lot of experience with coaching or with the Enneagram or with any form of inward reflection, it can be quite useful when they see me noticing things about myself, and then they can kind of take things on a little bit easier. So I guess it's just a bit of a reminder to self to be careful not to abuse that, not to overuse it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So Joan, Alistair, which one wants to go first?
Go ahead, Alistair.
Oh, thanks. Julia, just on that question, I think it's Krista who raised it about how soon do you bring in the childhood patterns and narratives? On that AIM report, there's a section that has that bit, right? And then also, in my view, isn't the work we do all about the little child the inner child in these adults that is kind of running the show? So because you see somebody well put together, but some of their decisions, they just don't make sense. So what I've decided to do is that my approach is always to kind of tap into that inner child. And I think that's where the juice is. However, the challenge is if you're dealing with a senior leader, for example, in the finance world, then you kind of, because you're effectively saying to them, your childhood is the one that's driving you right now. And they're coming from a numbers sort of linear driven approach, and you're trying to coach them about the unseen. So, I mean, I haven't mastered it, but I think the skill would be around how do you now bring that narrative in? And this guy could be 50 and you're saying, look, what happened to you when you were 8 is driving you. Because sometimes you get clients who ask me, so how was my personality formed? And there's an object relations theory around why a personality is formed and why you are the way you are. Similarly with stages of maturity. Then how do you now tell somebody that sensitive story? That's the challenge I face.
Yeah, I love you framing it as, how do you tell a 50-year-old CEO that his tiny little baby is running the show? I generally wouldn't. But I might be. It depends on my mood that day. Sometimes I can get quite naughty. But I think the idea of like old habits, you've got these old habits, are they still useful? Like, and maybe one of your habits is numbers. I mean, I think a lot of work that we do as coaches is around that exact thing, that specializing thing where people can't see beyond the numbers. So, like the other thing I did the other day was say, okay, so your job has got like getting stuff done, which is like numbers, and then leadership stuff. And then, so what's your feedback? Are you good at both, or are you good at one, or what? And then he could go to, no, I'm good at the number thing, but I don't know what the leadership thing is, because like when we have meetings, I think people are talking complete fluff at the table. So then that's a massive clue. This person can't see the qual. And then you go in there, but I would be careful of frightening them by saying your baby's running the show, even though it might be. Yeah, tricky one. But I think it's that deal that we all have to face. Good question. Thank you. Jo?
Yeah, also like what this conversation now around the childhood, and if you go to the childhood straight away, and Julia, I can imagine the way that you find a way just to go in there straight away. You might have even done it with me when you gave me my feedback. It's just kind of I suppose a way that works. I think my question really was more around to what extent as a coach one uses one's intuition to feel where to go and what to use, and to what extent one has prepared, this is the approach that I think is going to work, and then start with it and drop it if it doesn't feel right. So I'm interested in what you do and what other people on the call do in terms of how much is prepared and how much is sort of loose and intuitive, because I've done a couple of different coaching approaches. there's so many things in my head around possibilities, and invariably I get to the end of the call and think, well, it would be useful to have tried that, but I didn't think of it in the moment. You know, that sort of being ready with what's needed at the time.
Yeah. I think there's a personality thing. So I'm by nature a winger and a lazy preparer. So a bit of both. And everyone will have their own way that works for them. What I'm finding more and more useful now is note-taking. And there's a whole legal stuff around note-taking, believe it or not. The court can request your notes. That's another story. And that in South Africa, that law applies not just to therapists, but also to like body workers and all sorts of people. So be a little bit vigilant around what notes you keep. And if it's money laundering or drug selling, don't write down the names of everyone. But yeah, that's how I kind of roll with it. Other people, anyone want to comment how much prep they do?
I count among the lazy.
You're a lazy lot, Vicky?
The lazy wingers.
Lazy wingers? Are you a lazy winger?
I'm a lazy winger. Yeah.
Vicky?
For me, it depends on where I'm in the stage of coaching. So at the beginning, there's a lot of prep. I don't know if I should say a lot, obviously really reviewing the Enneagram, getting deep into the results and getting set up well for them. And then as we go deeper into the coaching partnership, I would say I'll set 4 minutes aside prior to review the notes. I take a lot of notes. That's how I learn and digest and retain. So I'll always write. And so I'll take a moment to review the notes session from last time and then the homework that I assigned so that when we jump in, I'm not having to go through my notes, stating that I'm totally relying on it. So I just have it fresh in my mind and we'll start in homework. But then when it comes to workshops, the preparation is, so I would kind of call that winging. I don't know if that sounds like winging or not, but for the workshops, that's where I will put a ton of preparation. I'll have the script and I go overboard on that. I think it's because when we're talking about a lot of people and I'm responsible for the flow and everything else, there's a lot of accountability I put on myself to be very comfortable with the content going in and then also knowing who's in the room, being on LinkedIn, looking to see who they are. And kind of a bit of history about them before they come into the room.
Interesting that you mentioned LinkedIn. Checking out who they are. That's interesting.
Yeah, depending on how vigilant the company or some people will always have their faces and pictures. This project I did on Friday was in the music industry. And so a lot of people didn't have their pictures up there. But in my little prep doc, I'll have just their name, their title, and their hierarchical order. And then I'll copy and paste just really quickly their face so that I know, because in the workshop, I want to have everyone's name. Yeah. And my workshops tend to be small. It's no more than 10. So it's easy to hold on to. But I think being able to use their name early in helps to build trust.
Cool. Thank you. Really interesting to know how people prepare. I was on a chat GPT-3 session yesterday, and there are some facilitators now who might do something like plan a diversity workshop for a music label for 10 people. And they put it into chat GPT-3 and out it comes. So there's another way to plan workshops. One of the coaches on that call was doing that, using that as the bare bones of a workshop and then sort of working around that. But one of the more interesting things that's happened with the adult development, the vertical development community and AI is that Chat GPT-3 has the maturity level of performing. And that's to do with what data it uses. So you get a performing level workshop, and if your people are at conforming, it's just not going to work. Just something to bear in mind. Isn't that fascinating?
Very.
So there's a whole new field coming out, including our dearly beloved Rickers and James, the statistician, myself, Lucille, Simon, sort of looking at the whole AI world. Sweet. Cool, thank you. Anyone else want to comment? Oh, Miriam, hi.
Hi. So I look in the evening as I complete my work and before I go to sleep, and I look at who I'm coaching the next day, and I go to their notes. I spend about 10 minutes reviewing each, and then I kind of just go, okay. And I go to sleep just saying it's going to be just kind of like, okay, this is what I want to do here, and this is what I'm going to create here. And I go to sleep, and then in the morning I wake up and I write some notes. But that's also how I prepare speeches. I think about what I'm going to speak, but I don't write anything down. And the night before, I kind of visualize it, and then in the morning I write the speech just before.
Lovely. All these interesting processes. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to make myself crazy, like write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And it was terrible. And then one day I said, to hell with that stuff. And I just kind of, that thing about sleeping on it at night and my subconscious seems to work pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not always.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting how everyone has their different way. And now reflecting, I'm thinking I probably do less prep for the first session than the sessions later. And I quite like the going in just with the numbers and getting a bit scared. Like, oh, can I do this properly? You know, that first session, can I connect? And then that forces me to wing, and winging is proper connection rather than doing theory. But yeah, anyway, thank you for that. I wanted to also just talk a little bit about this thing that I'm playing with at the moment, which is using relationships to with others. And I'm tired of seeing your faces so small. So I'm going to close that down and talk into larger faces. So I've been playing, you know, the whole thing about maturity is to increase the number of identities inside the person so they can have more agility in the world. So a lot of people get stuck in one or two personalities. And then our job as a coach could be seen as to expand the number of identities inside them. But now where are we going to get those personalities from? So I've been playing with stuff which has been such fun. One of the biggest openings is when coaching clients have babies or children. And you ask them to reflect on how they are in that relationship with the baby or the child. And then you consolidate that person, and you might even call them baby guy or Charlie or whatever. And you say, can we use Charlie at work as well? Or fun guy. And then you consolidate when fun guy comes out. When does he play? What does he do? And you bring them in. And it sounds like quite a basic kind of a thing, but I've just been quite shocked at the results. Because what it's saying to the person is, you've got these old personalities, you can use them. You've got flexibility, you've got skills. You know this stuff already. You don't have to learn much. Just go back, find where you left party guy last, you know. Ask him if he wants to come back. And then also, like, you know, party guy won't like it if when he comes along, you just criticize him the whole time. So you might have to change your behavior to make sure party guy stays. And I don't know why I'm finding it amusing. My clients are finding it amusing. It really works. What do you think about that? Trying to find ways to get new identities in. That makes sense. Cool.
I think it makes sense. I got a little confused about the new parents thing. I'm not sure where the new parent thing jumps in, but what I think I heard was having them identify certain parts of who they were at one point and then pulling them in. So what would Party Girl Vicky say about this new way of being where you're closed off and sheltered and not wanting to engage, something like this?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. And when people have babies, you know, not just the baby is born, but the parent is also born. And there's specific behavior that is born in that context. Like, you don't want to be rough with the baby. You want to be sweet and loving. You don't want to scare it. So like all of those are lovely new patterns of behaviors that can be used in other contexts. So maybe it's like when you're with the baby, or maybe with your dog, or maybe in Linda's case, it's with her horses. Or, you know, what are these different ways of operating that you have, and how are they triggered by the context? Cool. Now, you guys are looking tired. Are you all right?
It's an interesting subject. I'm learning a lot. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. I, of course, love all this stuff. I think I've got one more little thing. I'm not going to go through that. I just wanted to share this with you. So there is a fantastic new doctorate out. Obviously, only for those that have the energy for doctorates. But it's absolutely stunning. It's called Fostering Conscious Leadership by a woman called Alice. You see, like an old person, I have to put my glass. Anagnostakis. And what it does is it really fine-tunes the kinds of interventions that support maturation. So we've always had a broad idea, but here's some more bits and bobs. So the first thing is the coach should be more mature than the client. And there are a number of things that you can do if that's not the case. And that, you know, it becomes very interesting when it's the opposite way, because you don't want to pull your client back. That is, we're going to have a supervision session on that, because a lot of people submitting assignments at the moment have been concerned with, you know, I'm at performing, and here I'm working with somebody at transforming level. Oh my, what am I going to do? You know? And sort of a common sense approach would be sit back and relax, they'll do the work. Pace and style matching, we've spoken about not demanding the details, but looking for meta narratives. And I think the big thing here from the doctorate is, what she's saying is that maybe your biggest contribution as a coach is helping the client notice the negative emotions that are uncomfortable to sit with. So watching them come up, noticing relationship to the emotions, how much stamina they have to sit in the emotions, and how to build stamina around difficult emotions. What she is saying in this doctorate is sometimes that little piece of work is much more important than cognitive shifts. And that is going to build enhanced more maturity, much more than doing the kind of theory and cognitive pieces. And I think that it just feels right to me. So that means trying to get your client to get into the negative emotions. Hey, does anybody have any experience around this? Now, often we kind of feel quite good when the client does a cognitive shift, and we all sort of underneath it can become quite suspicious about how long is this going to last. And this is the answer to how long is it going to last. I don't know. Am I clear? Is there any confusion? Should I talk more about it? Shall I move on?
Can you talk more about it?
Yeah. So
Thank you.
like, yeah, so I'm not always clear. So like a client discovers actually they come across as aggressive. Okay. So like in a way that's like, oh, I've got some information. It's quite a cognitive thing. So then they go, oh, well, then I'll try and be softer. So that is kind of like a cognitive shift that happens in their head. Like, okay, I've got the feedback, I'm coming across as aggressive, now I'll try and be softer. But maybe instead of just leaving it at that, the coach should take them into how does it feel to be seen as aggressive? Or how does it feel to have missed the cues? How does it feel that people feel this about you, but don't tell you? You know, go into that feeling space around the awareness, because that's going to cement the deal. And if you don't clean out the shame part of that, it could mean the client only does the shift cognitively, which is not going to be that sustainable. Does that make sense? I'm struggling with my words.
Makes sense, yes. Yeah, but that's when the coach needs to come in very powerfully to say that and be very comfortable with them, rooted with themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of just celebrating the easy win.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Helena, thank you. Thanks, Miriam. Helena.
Just, I'm wondering if in the group that how have people handled what I've experienced as cognitive dissonance?
Mm. Do you
So
understand?
yeah, so that the client doesn't relate to the information or feedback being offered.
Mm.
And that, so, and some of it is fairly direct, you know, like you've got Lencioni's process where you're using what is the one quality that this person has that contributes to the success of a team, and then the other quality that the person has that detracts from the success of the team. So they have gotten information that says you have a tendency to procrastinate. You never own your own shit. You always blame somebody else. So they, from their own peer group, are being given pieces of information, and somehow they can completely blank out on all of this. And then, and you finding yourself, I found myself totally stuck in a session. So then I'm kind of saying, so what is the information that you've received that's landed on you that has made you feel that that's given you an insight into a gap analysis of something that you could get better at in terms of growth? So fishing, right? And the person's response is, well, the feedback I've received is that I'm not good enough about telling people about my successes. So that's what they come to the session with. And everything else that they have been offered by their own peers, they're blanking out. So my own feeling is that this person is uncoachable because they're not receiving anything that I can see that can be worked with. And I'm wondering, you know, kind of if other people have had clients where in the way that they've managed to give feedback, they've had a breakthrough. I mean, I've had another client years earlier who was an 8 who fired me. They didn't like the feedback that they were getting from either the Enneagram or a leadership perception survey. So blame the messenger, you're out of here. So, right. But I'm looking for insights from others as to what strategies they have used successfully when somebody has seemed to be unresponsive to, how have they provoked or managed a breakthrough of getting something to land on a person, or that an insight lands, because I am totally stuck.
Anybody want to answer? Jo.
So I'm not, this is not necessarily going to be helpful, but just a shared experience where with a person who I had similar as you described, Helena, but I think that person had a proper personality disorder. So was not actually able to realize the feedback. That it was not just that they didn't want to, or being stubborn or arrogant, or they just didn't have the capacity to, not through lack of intelligence, but a proper personality disorder. So that made me relax a little bit around it. And I don't think the coaching series was successful, other than perhaps helping people around them realize this person may not ever change. They're brilliant, let them do what they're brilliant at, but they may never change because they can't, as opposed to putting the pressure on myself to break through. That's been my experience.
Interesting. Anyone else? Yeah, Vicky.
Yeah, I've found that this happens. It's happened to me, well, several times, I think. Mainly this tends to happen with type 3s for me, where there's a this, what is it, well, first there's this wall of words that could tend to come up around rationalizing things away or not wanting to be in that space. And I found that I've encountered it more in corporate versus just directly, and it's really frustrating. And so I hear you, and Helena, I understand it. It's this, how can I coach you? If there's not this willingness. And I find that because, at least with these 2 individuals that I was coaching, there was a regard issue where they were objectifying others, and it became this, well, it's them, they are incompetent, the team is not good enough, they don't drive hard enough, they don't work hard enough, and so they're not as good as me. This is the mentality of what was coming in again with these 2 people. And without rambling, I think I've taken 2 approaches. One has been trying to just like hunker down and try and make it and almost hold up that mirror for them. And that does not work so yes, the mirror works, but wanting to really evoke change and have them get there. I find the more I'm attached and the more I drive at it, the harder it is, and it just doesn't work. So I think more releasing more for me has helped, and just allowing myself to relax in it and to be with what's there and detaching fully from this. How am I going to get you to this next level? Because it's obviously not about me as a coach getting them. They have to get there on their own. So it's almost this I don't want to say do nothing, but more of this relaxing into it. And then it tends to come. And with both, I know, Julie, you've taught us that we should be aware of what types are harder or easier for us to coach. And I've noticed, I think with threes, I really want to move away from being stuck in like, oh, well, I do nines, I don't do twos, or I do, eights, but I don't do fives, or whatever it may be. But I am noticing that with threes, it's a bit trickier for me.
Thank you. Interesting. Yeah, so some people are challenging. What I've done in the past, and I don't know if this is the time to say it, is say something like, what would it mean if this information was true? So don't spend time disputing the information, just go like, what would it mean? And then that breaks some of that three-ish thing or whatever thing. Like, what is the meaning? And go into the meaning of it. But also once I lost my cool with an Enneagram 3, and everywhere I scratched, it was like Teflon. And then eventually I said to him, well, I don't think you're a coach. I think you need to, and I actually said this to him, such a rude coach that I was. I think you need to get out in the world and fuck up some more. And then when you've got some problems, bring them back to me. And then he was so shocked. And he'd actually been assigned a coach, and I was about to like walk out. And then he said, no, I'm sure we can find something to talk about. And he's never forgotten me.
So Julia, that's pretty much where I am almost now. And I think if it was an individual client, but I work with team, and he's the weakest link. And if he fucks up the team.
Yeah. Do you think he's got some kind of narcissistic, sociopathic tendencies? Yeah. And have you got evidence of a trauma that might have caused that? Do you have any sense of something behind that?
I don't.
You don't, yeah.
Maybe I haven't asked those questions that would elicit that information. So yeah. Anyway.
That's very interesting, because it's like I used to have a problem with like getting videos into the television. And when we first were learning about technology, how do you get a video into a television? Is it through a cord or a memory stick? And it's the same with humans. How do you land an idea inside them? Really, really hard. Thank you for that. The one thing I wanted to say something just quick on is the one piece of information that we always have in the coaching session is the communication style of the person. And that is such a great access point and so shifting. So like if they just don't stop talking, then just interrupt and say, like, do you ever get the feedback that you talk too much? And done in a really kind of friendly kind of, do you ever get the feedback you talk too much? Yeah. Okay, well then stop then. That's such a great opening. Why do you talk too much? Why do you tell jokes? Why do you amuse me? Why do you stop me talking? Why do you only answer the questions you want to? I don't know. Anyway, that's just such a great access point. And the last one is the other thing that this doctorate came up with was you can see the coachability of somebody by how many external factors they blame. The more external factors they blame, the less coachable they are. So such a great insight.
Yes.
just to kind of see how much capacity for change that person has. So if they blame everything outside, you know, it's going to be a long haul, like your guy, Helena. Wow, Za, that was an intense session. How are you all? You ready to go and start your day or end your day? Okay, Joe, what are you offering us? Apple TV? Oh, yes, shrinking. Just stop it. Just stop doing that. You know, is that what they do?
So that's a psychiatrist, and he just has a completely bold, rude approach to his clients, and just, you know, says, just bloody well leave your husband, or, you know, and just does all the things he's not supposed to, and has fabulous results.
Yeah,
It's very funny. It's on at the moment, so if anybody watches Apple TV, look it up. It's
lovely. I will do that. There is a precedent for rude coaches that earn lots of money, by the way. So thank you all for coming. It's been divine. Thank you for your brilliant.
Can you type in the surname of the doctorate author?
Yes, I can. I could also just share it with you.
please.
Yeah, I think I've got, let me just check. I've got all your emails. And then while I'm doing that, I'm also going to share our new validity and reliability document, which you can read or you can just use as toilet paper, because it's the real technical validity and reliability document, and probably very few people will read the whole thing, but it's useful in case a client wants it. Cool. Thank you, guys.
Julia. Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
Thanks,
Go well.
Julia. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.